Good morning, and thank you very much for coming and participating in this seminar. We're going to be talking today about boards of trustees. All of us are involved in boards, whether we're volunteer members of boards, whether we're staff members of boards, and so one of the things we want to talk about is the development of those boards and what works most effectively in board development. I want to just give a brief background about boards in general. They have many responsibilities. First and foremost is hiring, of course, the president, whether that be of a university, a college, a health organization, a social service organization. So hiring that individual is critical to what a board does and what an institution is able to do. The second thing, or one of many things that they do, is to steward the resources of that organization to meet then its goals and its priorities. And thirdly, it has to do then with fiduciary responsibility as well. Setting budgets, looking at investments, setting tuition, setting fees for service, whatever that might be, there's the fiduciary responsibility. So those are three of probably 8 or 10 responsibilities of a board. Today what I want to spend some time on is talking about governance. Because unlike all the other committees of the board, and I do think they're all important, let me say that, I understand and have come to understand more the role of governance as very key and critical to that. So here's some things about trends in governance that I want to cover first. And this has really occurred in the last 10 years or so, some of the more emerging trends. One is to be accountable. We have today in our society a much more activist donors. We have donors who are more sophisticated. They want to know where their money's going to, what impact it's having, etc. And if indications of the millennial generation is anything, they clearly want to see social impact. So this ability to be accountable, transparent, is very critical to a board and its governance, which then is being expected to govern. I would say that many years ago, it was not atypical for a board to meet, whether they met monthly, quarterly, whatever that schedule might be, to endorse whatever the president or the director said. Some would refer to that as a rubber stamp. However, it was something that they probably didn't ask a great deal of questions about. Now they come to the table and they want to know more. So boards are expected to govern. The next thing is having to do with the right size of the board. There are boards in perhaps some social service organizations with 4 or 5 people, and I know of universities and colleges that have 50 to 70 board members. Somewhere in between there is probably a right size, and that is going to be determined by your organization, its mission, its vision, and purpose. But the ability to right size is very important. When boards then look at recruitment of board members, this needs to occur very, very strategically, and it also needs to then follow a strategic plan. Many presidents or incoming executive directors, when they first arrive at an institution, organization, they'll spend that first year along with the stakeholders undertaking a strategic planning process. So what board governance needs to be worried about that is where then is the organization based on the strategic plan going to be in the next 5, 7, 10 years, so that they can begin to think about individuals who have skills that are down the road. What are people's insights? What perspectives might they bring? One of the things, too, that's happening more and more are formal orientation sessions. Before, many people would, and I'm sure none of you have had this experience, where in March you decide, oh, we've got some new people we need to bring on, let's see who we can get. And then at the May or the June meeting, you vote them in, and then they show up at the first meeting and have no clue what they're doing. I know none of us do that. So what more boards have been doing have been, in fact, formal orientations. Another thing then about board governance is making certain that we're clear about one's responsibilities and what that entails over the course of the time. Now, regardless of where our organization is, if it's in education, health services, social services, whatever the area is, the issue is that we're now not only a national but a global society, and there are trends and challenges that are going to impact our organization. And so it's incumbent upon those of us in these leadership roles within our institution to in fact provide some very strategic information, if you will, to our board, help them digest it. It might be providing them information and insight from an outsider coming in and talking about that, letting them think about what that impacts or what the impact might be for them, and talk about it again in several months or another year. Another issue in governance has been to take boards historically have been more working boards, and what the trend is to move the working part into committee structures, so that committees then, based on the strategic plan and the areas that impact that committee, will in fact then do a great deal of the work, if you will, of that organization. And when there's policy or guidelines to be had, that then comes to the board level. What we're really trying to do is to keep the board at a very strategic level, that 35,000-foot level. We really don't want them in the weeds. Sharing relevant financial information is another area that has changed dramatically. Finance committees have typically been the one that does the budget, does everything, presents it, and there's a glaze over the rest of the board. Well, now with fiduciary responsibility, board members, all board members, are learning more and more about the budget process, about able to read a profit and loss statement. If you're on a college or an educational board, you're setting tuition. If you're in the social service, you may be setting user fees. Wherever you are dealing with finances. And to that extent, you need to have a full grasp. Our board members need to have that. So the specific responsibilities then for the governance committee, albeit a board should be engaged in all of this as well, but specifically for the governance committee, is to identify, cultivate, recruit and orient the board, to assess the board's performance, to provide some recommendations that perhaps will then enhance the board's strength, its depth, its bandwidth, if you will. A group on the governance committee also need to consider then the board's leadership and what those priorities are. And in the work that I do, I always talk about who's your next board chair when we talk about campaigns, because the likelihood that that person will be the board chair is pretty significant. What I also ask is who's the third president to follow, so that we need to be thinking about succession planning. It's not that it's always set up and it has to go this way, but we need to talk about the strengths and the skills that we want. And then finally, the committee obviously is to ensure an infusion of new board members. There's a board cycle that we often refer to. I won't go into the details of this right now because I am going to be speaking about it in a moment. But basically it starts with identifying the priorities, the cultivation of board members, recruitment, all the way around to where we rotate people then off the board. And so we refer to this as a 9-step cycle in board development. So let's start with the first step. Identifying the board priorities. As I mentioned earlier, an organization, institution needs to be looking at a strategic plan. One of my current clients, I was so excited when I got the RFP because I went online, which I do when I get these requests, and lo and behold, there was a strategic plan. It was well written, it had benchmarks, they had updated it annually, it was in place like 3 years. And then I noted, my gosh, there's a marketing committee. And there was a marketing study and a branding that happened. So those of us in our field know that the next step then is a campaign. So that's in essence what I'm doing with this particular organization. The beauty is that that's not the way they all work. And so we know what their board priorities are. And part of what we're doing is this board assessment as well. And it's very clear what they need. So that's the fun part, when they know what they need. So we need this strategic priorities, looking at what we have, what we're missing. Sometimes what boards are now doing more and more is what we call a board matrix, where they'll take on one column everything from gender, age. If you're at a college or independent school, you might look at class year. You look at ethnicity and race. You look at expertise. You name all those kinds of things that you want to see on your board. You have your board, those that are continuing, take an assessment of where they are. And then once you do that, you see where the holes are. You see where the gaps are. You see where you need depth. One organization I was working with, they had 3 attorneys on their board. And at the time, I think, it was probably good. However, it so happened that all 3 were rotating off at the same time. So these are the kinds of things to look at in terms of what you might need. And then you're able to go through and do this next step of identification of potential board members. And so often we talk about recruitment, and I'd like to talk about cultivating first. In the same way that we talk about cultivating donors and a donor cycle, we too need to have a board cycle. One that we have identified people with their potential interests, capacities, a range of things, and keep them in, I guess, what we would refer to as the pipeline. There'll be some people, most of the people that we identify could always be on our board. It becomes a matter of the right time, the right fit for us as well as for the individual. So knowing this, we want to make certain then that we're developing relationships, that we have cultivated, we have garnered their interest in us. Sometimes they may want to go on a committee. We have an organization right now that I'm working with where the individual does not want to go on the board. She's finishing 2 other board terms. However, she offered to go on a committee. That's great, and probably the best place for her right now. So then once we've done this, we need to then recruit. And this is where, very similar to when we hire people, we want to describe why we think this person is important to us, what they can bring to the table, what their contributions could be. We talk about expectations, we talk about responsibilities. And then we stop and we allow them to ask questions of us. It's very important for them to, you know, we may think we know what they need to know, but they have things they want to know. So we need to stop. It's like making the ask and then continuing to talk. We want to elicit their interests, their preparedness, and we don't ever want to minimize the requirements. Some of the things we will talk about with them is avoiding conflict, or even the appearance of. Fiduciary responsibilities that I mentioned earlier, we need and want to talk with them about their philanthropic support. We need to let them know what the range is, whether it's a set amount, whether it's based on capacity, an average, whatever it is, we need to let people know what it is that we're expecting and review some of the personal characteristics. So board orientation, we need to provide perspective on our organization and on our board. I recommend highly that it not be just a one-person talk with them, but that I encourage potential board members to, if I'm at a college or university, to go talk to the deans, go talk to some other people, get their perspective on us. If I'm on in an organization such as the one that I volunteer with now, I encourage them to do the same. Talk to other board members, talk to others who are using or a part of our services. Provide visits and campus visits or site visits where possible. Sometimes in organizations that's not possible, given the confidentiality of the services. Many boards are now providing a mentor or a buddy, someone that's on the board to help that first year, before meetings, after meetings, be able to sit down with someone and say, what just happened? Did I miss something? And to really help orient that person in a much quicker way. And of course, provide board books. Engagement, once we've got the board members on, we need to really discover more intently what their interests are and their availability to serve. Some people have positions that are cyclical. We need to know what they are. We need to understand that at this time of the year, for example, one board member in the volunteer organization I'm in, she does this work. And so I can assure you that in May and June is not the time that we really can count on her. She's been very clear about that. So we work with other members of that committee knowing that we get the other 10 months of the year. We ask them for their feedback and listen to it. We hold people accountable, express when work is well done, and we need to also then engage board members in the board meeting and its effectiveness. Education. This is again what I said earlier, we're all in different fields. Regardless of what that is, there are trends, there are key issues, and we need to make certain that we help inform the board about those key issues so that they can deliberate and make informed decisions. We can promote and explore those issues. If we're really good at this, we maybe put that out 2 or 3 months in advance and allow the board to digest that, read more, and be able to come back in that. We don't ever want to hide our difficulties that we have, and we want to make sure that we're assigning responsibilities appropriately. Evaluate and assess. We need to obviously engage our board annually in a board assessment, and probably every 2 or 3 years a more in-depth board assessment. And then also a self-assessment. How am I as an individual performing? How does that contribute to the overall welfare of the board? And then identify ways in which you can improve the performance. Celebrate. Now that actually should be something we do all along, where we celebrate victories, small ones, we recognize individuals' contributions, and we need to make room for laughter and fun. I always say to people that I've worked with, I spend more time with you than I do with my family. So if I can't have fun and laugh and recognize, we need to take our work seriously, but we need to express ourselves with some degree of humor. And rotate, establish term limits. Sometimes you can have multiple terms, take time off, come back, whatever that be, but term limits I think are very important. And don't assume automatically re-elect for the next term. These are some things when you're doing self-assessments that come into play. Explore possibilities of helping someone resign if they need to. Develop new leadership and rotate on committees. I think a good place to bring someone that's finished their first term and continuing, have them move to a different committee. Let them bring insight into that other committee. And finally, we need to be talking about the board as a team. Imagine, if you will, that a board is responsible annually for anywhere from $250,000 to $1 billion. Now, it's all about zeros, right? The issue is, if you're going to sit in a room with people to make those decisions, I would like very much to know who's sitting to my right or left, not only at the board meeting, but to understand more about their background and their experience and what the depth and breadth of that is. So we need to provide opportunities for board members to get to know each other. That helps set up the norms for the operation. It develops, most importantly, that climate for very frank exchange. And then we need to take time to evaluate meetings and our projects, and again, express appreciation for everybody. Much of this can also be done in retreat settings and in social gatherings. And so those are some of the things that come about as a result of boards and effective board governance. What I would conclude with is that boards and the leadership of the organization are definitely about creating a constructive partnership. It's both groups that need to participate. What it is, though, for those of us that lead organizations, it truly is our responsibility to bring much of this to the table. If we don't, when I hear someone say, oh, I've got to go to another board meeting, if that board person says one more time, well, my response is, and what are you doing about that? How are you engaging them? Because I would offer that 9 times out of 10, it's our responsibility to take care of that. Thank you.